What if one ordinary flight became the moment the world finally opened its eyes? Picture this: two black teenagers, polite, well-dressed, holding first-class tickets with their names printed clearly. Yet before the plane even leaves the gate, they're told coldly that they don't belong there. Cameras come out. Passengers stare. The air feels heavier than gravity itself. Now imagine one of those kids is yours. Would you tell them to stay quiet and not make trouble? Or would you stand up, even if the whole system tried to silence you? Because when those twins called their father, they didn't just reach a parent. They reached the man who built the very airline that tried to humiliate them. And within minutes, he turned a moment of injustice into a reckoning that the world would never forget. This isn't just a story about a flight being grounded. It's about a father grounding a nation in what truly matters: respect, truth, and equality. If this story makes you think, stay with me. Hit like, share, and subscribe, because what happens next will change the way you look at power, family, and justice forever. The first light over Manhattan always looked like forgiveness. A soft gold bleeding through glass towers, washing the city clean of yesterday's noise. Inside a penthouse overlooking the Hudson, Malcolm Avery stood in silence, coffee steaming in his hand. The news murmured low in the background, headlines about markets and mergers, but he wasn't listening. He was watching his twins. Jalen and Maya sat at the kitchen island, still in their matching gray hoodies, bickering gently over whose turn it was to feed the cat before their flight. They were 17, mirror images but opposites in spirit. Jalen quiet, analytic, his mind always somewhere in circuitry. Maya fiery, quick to defend anyone she thought was treated unfairly. Malcolm smiled. "You two have 5 minutes before the driver's here. Did you pack the charger I bought you?" "Yes, sir," Jalen mumbled, without looking up from his tablet. Maya rolled her eyes. "You always ask like we're going to forget." "I ask because I know how travelers think," Malcolm said softly. "We remember the big things tickets, luggage, but it's the little things that ruin a trip." He sipped his coffee, then added, "And the little things often reveal who we are." Maya squinted at him. "Is that one of your CEO quotes or a dad quote?" He chuckled. "Maybe both." The twins laughed. For a moment, everything felt ordinary in early flight, teenagers teasing their father. But beneath that warmth was a quiet gravity Malcolm couldn't shake. He'd worked 20 years to build Ether Air, an airline that promised safety and dignity for everyone. Yet he knew systems could rock quietly, one unchecked bias at a time. He set down the mug. "Remember, kids' respect goes both ways. No matter who talks down to you, you stay calm. Dignity doesn't shout." Jalen nodded. Maya frowned. "You sound worried." "Not worried," he said. "Just aware. The world still sees what it wants to see." He looked at their reflection in the window, his dark skin, their bright eyes, the skyline stretching like a dare, and sometimes it refuses to see what's true. JFK Airport, 6:40 a.m. The terminal hummed with its usual mix of impatience and perfume. Screens blinked, espresso machines hissed, and voices spilled into one another like waves. The twins moved through security with the confidence of frequent flyers. They'd flown countless times, usually under the radar, never using their father's name, never wearing the badges that could open executive lounges. Malcolm wanted them to experience the world as themselves, not as the CEO's kids. "Gate B12, Jalen said, checking the app. "Ether Air Flight 871 to L. A. Boards in 15. "Perfect," Maya said, tucking a curl behind her ear. "Maybe we'll actually sleep this time." They reached the gate just as the boarding line formed. The lead flight attendant, Cassandra Hale, was smiling that tight, trained smile of first-class service. Her Navy uniform was crisp, her blonde bun immaculate. She scanned boarding passes like a queen blessing her subjects. When Jalen handed over their digital passes, her eyes flicked up and froze for half a second too long. "Seats 1A and 1B, she repeated. "Yes, ma'am," Jalen answered politely. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "That's interesting. Usually those are reserved for our Ambassador Platinum members." Maya frowned. "We bought them. Weeks ago." "Of course," Cassandra said. "Scanning again." The scanner beeped green, but her hand hesitated on the edge of the machine. "Do you have confirmation emails or IDs associated with the account?" Jalen blinked. "This is the confirmation." Other passengers began to glance over. Cassandra's voice lowered, but the skepticism didn't. "It's just unusual. I'd like to double-check with the captain before you board. Please step aside." Maya crossed her arms. "Are you kidding me, ma'am?" Cassandra said quickly. Tone sharpening. "I'm asking politely." The line slowed. A white businessman in a tailored suit muttered, "Always something. Loud enough for others to hear." Maya's cheeks flushed, but Jalen touched her wrist, "Stay calm." Cassandra tapped her radio. "Captain Reese, I have a boarding discrepancy in first." Static answered, then a clipped male voice. "Handle it per policy." Policy. That word had built and broken entire careers. 10 minutes crawled by before Cassandra returned. Her smile had hardened into professionalism, carved from ice. "I'm afraid there appears to be a duplication in the system. 2 passengers assigned to the same seats." Maya's jaw dropped. "That's impossible." "Technology fails sometimes," Cassandra said, as if explaining rain. "I'll need you to wait while we resolve it." Behind her, another passenger approached, older, gray-haired, confident. Cassandra lit up immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Langston. You're 1A. Correct?" He nodded. "Always. And just like that." She waved him through. Jalen felt something twist in his chest. "Excuse me, those are our seats." Cassandra's smile didn't waver. "Sir, please lower your voice." Maya stepped forward, trembling with anger. "You literally just said there was a duplication." "Enough," Cassandra snapped softly. "Security will sort this out. Please wait." They waited and waited. People stared. Someone took out a phone. Maya's eyes glistened. "I hate this," she whispered. "We did nothing wrong." Jalen swallowed hard. He wanted to say it would be fine, but his throat felt tight. Every word from Cassandra replayed in his mind like static. "It's unusual. It's unusual." At last, a tall man in pilot uniform approached, the captain, Douglas Reese. His eyes swept over them once, assessing. "What's the issue?" "Duplicate seating," Cassandra said quickly. "They claim 1A and 1B, but Mr. Langston's already boarded." Captain Reese turned to the twins. "You have boarding passes." Jalen handed his phone over. Reese glanced at the screen, frowned. "Looks valid. But my manifest shows 2 ambassadors in those seats. Not these names." Maya's voice shook. "So because your list is wrong, you assume we're the mistake. Watch your tone." "Young lady," Reese said evenly. "Airlines have rules." Jalen tried once more. "Sir, our father doesn't change airline protocol." The captain interrupted. "If you can't comply, you'll need to fly coach or disembark." That word disembark hit like a slap. Maya stared at him, speechless. The terminal buzzed faintly in the background, 100 conversations colliding. "Finally?" she whispered. You think we don't belong there." Neither the captain nor Cassandra replied. They didn't have to. 7020. The boarding gate closed. The twins stood alone near the counter, watching their first-class dream vanish behind a glass door. Jalen clenched his fists. "Maya, call Dad." "I can't. He's in the board meeting with Call Him." Her hands trembled as she dialed. Across town, in a conference room lined with investors. Malcolm Avery's phone vibrated against the mahogany table. He saw the name Maya Avery, and his pulse tightened. He excused himself quietly, stepping into the hallway where city lights spilled through the windows. "Sweetheart, you should be on the plane." Her voice cracked. They said our seats didn't exist." "What do you mean?" "They said we couldn't be in first class. They gave our seats to some other man. They're calling security." Malcolm closed his eyes. The hallway around him went silent. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, very quietly, "Stay right where you are. Dad, do not cry." "Maya." His voice softened, but carried steel underneath. "You did nothing wrong. You hear me? Yes. I'm coming." He hung up, turned, and looked through the glass at his team inside the conference room. Their mouths moved. Graphs flickered on the screen, but the world had shifted. For the first time in years, Malcolm felt something older than leadership, something primal. His daughter's voice, his son's silence, the word disembark. He straightened his jacket, pulled his phone again, and said 2 words into the receiver: "Hold the plane." When the jet bridge door reopened, a hush rippled through the gate. Passengers who had already boarded peered out, confused by the sudden pause in departure. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but none more than Cassandra Hale. She had seen the update flash across her device flight held by executive directive. What kind of executive had that kind of pull inside the plane? "Mr. Langston reclined comfortably in seat 1A, a glass of orange juice in hand. "What's the holdup?" he asked irritably, his voice echoing across the cabin. Cassandra forced a smile. "Just a small system issue." "Sir?" "Then fix it," he muttered. "Some of us have real business waiting in Los Angeles." Meanwhile, back in the terminal, Jalen and Maya Avery sat on a bench near the boarding counter, their carry-ons untouched at their feet. Jalen was silent, scrolling through his phone, replaying every word Cassandra had said. Maya's hands wouldn't stop shaking. "I shouldn't have called him," she whispered. "Now everyone's staring. They think we did something wrong." Jalen turned to her. "You didn't do anything wrong, Maya, and neither did I. They just don't believe people like us belong up there." Before Maya could respond, the sliding doors opened. A line of security officers stepped aside as a tall, composed figure entered the gate. Malcolm Avery. His presence carried that quiet gravity only people used to command could project. He wasn't angry, at least not outwardly, but there was a focus in his eyes that made everyone step back instinctively. The gate agent stammered, Sir, the flight's about to." "Not without me," Malcolm said calmly, showing his badge. It wasn't an airport badge. Not exactly. It was the corporate identification of Ether Air's chief executive officer. The agent froze. Cassandra's voice cracked over the intercom from inside the cabin captain. "There's a man requesting access claims. He's from Corporate Captain Douglas Reese," replied. "We're wheels up in 3 minutes. No exceptions." But the next sound over the radio was the terminal manager's voice, tight with panic. "Captain Reese, this is Tower Operations. You're to hold at gate until clearance from Ether Corporate is given. Effective immediately." Silence filled the frequency. Inside the cabin, passengers exchanged looks. Langston scoffed. Unbelievable. Bureaucrats. Then, through the open aircraft door, Malcolm Avery stepped inside. His presence filled the narrow aisle like a cold wind cutting through heated air. Cassandra blinked in shock, her polite smile faltering. "Sir, this area is restricted." "You can't just—" Malcolm's gaze moved past her, scanning the rows until his eyes landed on his children. Maya stood up instantly, tears in her eyes. Jalen followed, face steady but pale. "Dad," she breathed. He nodded once, reassuring her, then turned to Cassandra. "Are you the lead flight attendant, 2M, sir?" she stammered, unsure whether to salute or hide. "Good. Then you can explain," he said quietly, why 2 paid passengers were denied their seats. The captain appeared from the cockpit, jaw tight. "Sir, this is an internal issue. I'm the final authority on board this aircraft." Malcolm turned toward him, voice still calm. "And I'm the final authority over this airline." A hush swept through first class. Cassandra's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "I wasn't aware." "No," Malcolm said. "You weren't. Because you didn't look beyond what you thought you saw." He moved a step closer, his tone soft but surgical. "Tell me, what did you think when you saw my children at the gate? That they couldn't afford the seats? That they didn't fit the image of who belongs in one?" Cassandra swallowed hard, her throat clicking audibly. "There was a duplication. It was in the system." "Show me," he said. She froze, because, of course, there wasn't. There had never been a duplication. The scanner had read green. She had just felt a flicker of disbelief, one she never questioned. Passengers watched, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shame. One man recorded quietly, his phone angled low. The sound of the jet engines idling outside hummed like distant thunder. Malcolm took a breath, steadying himself. He wasn't here to humiliate anyone. He was here to hold a mirror. "Captain Reese," he said, turning. "Would you like to explain why my children were told to leave their seats without verifying the manifest?" Reese squared his shoulders. "Mr. Avery, with all respect, my priority is maintaining order and schedule. These situations can escalate quickly. I made a judgment call, based on what the captain hesitated. Experience, Malcolm repeated softly, almost to himself. That's what bias often calls itself when it doesn't want to be named. The words hung in the air. For a moment, no one moved. Then Malcolm's voice lowered, measured and final, effective immediately. "This flight is grounded. All passengers will deplane. There will be a new crew assigned." Cassandra gasped. "Sir, please, you can't." "I can," he said simply. "And I just did." The intercom crackled. "Ground control confirmed Ether 871. You are ordered to remain at gate pending executive directive. Offload passengers." Langston shot up from his seat, face red. "This is ridiculous. I have connections, so do I," Malcolm said evenly. "And I'm using them to make sure my airline never humiliates another family again." The cabin fell into stunned silence. Some passengers murmured support, others stared at their shoes. The blogger, Ben Lawson, recorded every word, his heart pounding. He knew he was witnessing something rare, an act of authority that didn't sound like rage, but justice. As the crowd slowly filed out, Cassandra lingered, eyes wet, whispering, "Sir, I didn't mean harm." Malcolm regarded her quietly. "Intent doesn't erase impact. You'll have a chance to reflect during the investigation, but right now, you'll step off my aircraft." She nodded, trembling, and disappeared down the jet bridge. The twins stood frozen. Jalen finally spoke, voice low. You didn't have to come. Dad. Malcolm turned to him with a faint smile. Yes, I did. But the board meeting. There are meetings, he said softly, and then there are moments. One of them decides who you are. Maya exhaled shakily. They looked at us like we didn't belong. He placed a hand on her shoulder. They were wrong. And tomorrow, the world will know why. Outside the cabin window, dawn had burned into full daylight. The engines powered down, their echo fading across the tarmac. Ben Lawson posted the first clip within minutes, a calm black CEO grounding his own airline to defend his children. The caption read, "He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just said, 'Hold the plane.'" And everything stopped. By the time the passengers reached the terminal, the video had already gone viral. Malcolm didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just about one flight. It was about every silent moment when dignity was questioned and no one spoke up. This time, someone did. He took one last look at his children, both still shaken but standing tall. "Let's go home," he said quietly. "There's work to do." And as they walked out together, cameras flashed behind the glass. A storm of public reckoning was already rising, one that would test the limits of his power, his compassion, and the soul of the airline he built. But for now, in that narrow corridor smelling faintly of jet fuel and morning air, it was just a father and his children reclaiming what had been taken from them: dignity, seat numbers, and the quiet right to belong. By the time the sun climbed high above JFK, the terminal was pulsing with whispers. Screens flashed delayed notices, passengers filmed updates, and hashtags bloomed across social media like wildfire. "Wow, hold the plane." Most had no idea what had actually happened. They only knew that a CEO had stopped a flight because something wasn't right. In the quiet of a private lounge, Malcolm Avery sat opposite his children. The glass walls kept out the airport noise, but not the ache of humiliation that still lingered in the air. Maya was hunched forward, her arms around her knees. Jalen stared out at the tarmac, watching ground crews move like tiny figures on a gray chessboard. "Are they fired?" Maya asked, her voice small. Malcolm didn't answer right away. He was looking down at his phone, scrolling through incoming messages. His assistant had already sent him clips from passengers, internal reports from operations, and the beginnings of a PR storm that would define the next 48 hours. He finally said, "They're suspended. The investigation starts immediately." Suspended. Maya's tone rose. "After what they did, they'll face consequences," Malcolm said evenly. "But justice isn't about how angry we feel. It's about how right we stay when we act." Jalen turned to him. "But everyone saw. Dad. They'll twist it online. Make it sound like we caused the problem." Malcolm's expression softened. "Then we tell the truth. Son. Quietly. Clearly. And with evidence. The truth doesn't need to shout either. Outside the glass, a plane lifted into the sky, the engines roaring faintly through the walls. For a long time, none of them spoke. Then Maya whispered. It didn't feel like bias at first. It just felt like disbelief, like she couldn't process what she was seeing. Malcolm nodded slowly. That's how most prejudice begins. Not with hatred, just disbelief that equality could look different than expected. He reached across the table, resting his hand on hers. But disbelief is not harmless when it denies someone their dignity. Maya swallowed hard. "I just wanted to belong there." "You do," he said simply. "You always did." At that moment, Malcolm's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't his assistant, it was Chairman Olson, the board's senior member. "Malcolm, came the stern voice through the speaker. "What in God's name happened? The FAA just called us. The media's circling." "You grounded a plane, I did," Malcolm replied calmly. "Why?" "Because that plane was about to take off with a lie. Sitting in seat 1A. There was silence on the other end. "You're going to have to explain that." "I will," Malcolm said, his tone steady. "Not just to the board, to the country." He ended the call before Olson could argue. His children were watching him, their faces a mix of awe and fear. "Are you in trouble?" Jalen asked quietly. Malcolm smiled faintly. "Sometimes standing up looks like trouble at first." Later that afternoon, they drove home. The city outside their car window felt different, louder, sharper, filled with a strange energy that hummed like static. When they pulled into the driveway, Maya checked her phone. Her heart skipped. "Dad," she whispered. "You need to see this. The video Ben Lawson's clip was everywhere now. It had been viewed 3 million times in 5 hours. People were sharing it with captions like 'This is leadership.' And finally, someone in power cares." "In the video." Malcolm stood calmly in the first-class cabin, his voice firm but never raised. The caption at the bottom read, he didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply said, "Show me." Maya replayed it 3 times, unable to look away. Her father hadn't looked angry. He'd looked resolute. Malcolm watched the screen in silence. For all his years building Ether Air, he had never expected to become a symbol. He didn't want to trend. He wanted change. By nightfall, the calls were relentless. Networks wanted interviews. Advocacy groups wanted partnerships. And lawyers offered statements of support. But amid the chaos, one email stopped him cold. It was from Cassandra Hale. "Mr. Avery, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know. I've been replaying it in my mind all day. I thought I was following procedure, but now I see I was following fear. I'm sorry for what I did to your children. If there's a way to make it right, I'm listening. Cassandra." Malcolm stared at the message for a long time. He thought about deleting it, but something in her words held him still. "I was following fear." That line echoed louder than any apology. He walked to the window. Outside, the city lights shimmered like scattered gold across the river. His reflection looked older than it had that morning. Maya approached quietly. "Who's it from?" He showed her. She read in silence, then frowned. She's sorry now because the world saw her, not because she saw herself. Malcolm nodded. Maybe, but recognizing fear is the first step toward changing it. Jalen joined them by the window. "So what happens next?" Malcolm exhaled slowly. "Tomorrow, we start an internal review. Every department, every crew, every gate." He turned toward them, his voice low but certain. "We'll fix the system that allowed this. Not just for us, but for anyone who ever felt unseen." That night, long after the twins had gone to bed, Malcolm sat in his office surrounded by blueprints of Ether's early days. Framed photos lined the shelf his grandmother Eleonora, standing in front of her old sewing machine, smiling with tired eyes. He could almost hear her voice. "Respect isn't given, child. It's built, stitch by stitch." He remembered the nights he'd spent as a young engineer, too afraid to speak up when colleagues dismissed his designs, too careful to stay polite while others took credit. He'd promised himself then that when he led, he'd lead differently. Now the promise was being tested. He opened his laptop and began drafting a company-wide memo, effective immediately. Ether Air will launch a full transparency audit to review how bias implicit or systemic affects our passenger experience. This is not about punishment. It's about rebuilding trust. We will also establish a new passenger dignity office, independent, accountable, and led by people who understand what it means to be seen. He stopped typing, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Then he added a final line. To every employee reading this, justice begins the moment we stop confusing silence with professionalism. When he hit send, the screen glowed faintly in the dark office. For the first time that day, he felt a kind of calm settle over him, not peace exactly, but purpose. The next morning, the headline splashed across major news outlets read Ether Air, CEO grounds flight over discrimination launches, National Reform Plan. Maya read it aloud at breakfast, half proud, half worried. Dad, they're calling you the man who grounded the sky. He smiled at the nickname. If grounding one plane helps us lift people higher, I'll take it. But beneath the calm, he knew the backlash would come. Investors would question him, unions would push back, and critics would claim it was all performance. The days ahead would test not only his company, but his conviction. Still, as he looked at his children across the table, their eyes clearer than yesterday's fear, he thought of his grandmother's words again, stitch by stitch. And somewhere in the city, Cassandra Hale reread her own email, still waiting for a reply that hadn't come. The silence between them wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was no longer a verdict. It was a beginning. By the third morning, New York's skyline looked sharper, almost tense. Headlines still pulsed across screens. Ether CEO grounds his own plane. Over racism allegations, cable news ran the footage on repeat. Malcolm's calm voice, Cassandra's silence, the words, "Hold the plane," at Ether Air's headquarters. The boardroom felt more like a courtroom. The walls of glass reflected restless faces. Lawyers, investors, executives who once called Malcolm a visionary now whispered about public relations crises and market dips. Chairman Olson sat at the head of the long table, tapping a pen against his notepad. "Malcolm, before we begin, you understand the magnitude of what you've done." Malcolm met his gaze evenly, completely. "You grounded a flight without clearance from operations." Olson pressed. "Do you realize the precedent that sets every captain in the fleet is questioning chain of command? Shareholders are calling. This isn't how airlines function. This isn't how dignity functions either," Malcolm replied, voice calm but firm. Olson frowned. "We're not here to debate ethics. We're here to protect the company." Malcolm leaned forward slightly, the faintest hint of weariness in his eyes. "Protect it from what accountability all?" A low murmur spread across the table. One of the younger executives, Dana Lee, cleared her throat. "With respect, sir. The public seems supportive. Engagement is up. People are calling it a turning point." Olson waved a hand. "Public opinion changes faster than the weather. We can't build policy on emotion." "Then maybe we should build it on truth," Malcolm said quietly. Silence followed. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. He continued, his tone measured but carrying the weight of conviction. "When we built Ether, we promised something simple. Every passenger deserves the same sky. That promise wasn't broken by turbulence. It was broken by bias. And I won't let our silence be the glue that holds that break together." The room shifted. Someone coughed. Another scribbled notes just to avoid eye contact. Olson sighed. "Idealism is admirable, Malcolm, but what you're proposing, full equity audits, independent oversight, it's expensive. It's disruptive." Malcolm smiled faintly. So was flight. Once. He stood, walking toward the window, where the city sprawled beneath them like a living map. We're not in the business of airplanes. Gentlemen, we're in the business of trust. You can't sell first class if people believe your humanity stops at the boarding gate. Dana Lee looked up. So what do you want from us? Approval to form the Passenger Dignity Council, Malcolm replied. A body outside corporate influence. I want them to review every discrimination claim past and present. I also want to invite community advocates, ethicists, and even former passengers to help rewrite our service protocols. The CFO, Harold Trent, scoffed. That's suicide. You're inviting critics into your own cockpit. No, Malcolm said softly. I'm inviting sunlight. Olson drummed his fingers again, eyes narrowing. And if the board rejects this, Malcolm turned from the window. Then I'll resign. Publicly. And explain exactly why. The room went utterly still. For the first time. Olson looked uncertain. You're threatening the board. I'm offering it a choice, Malcolm answered. Be the first airline to face its reflection or the last to survive the crash of public trust. Olson's pen stopped tapping. Across the table, Dana Lee exhaled slowly. I second the motion. One by one. Hesitant hands rose. Not all but enough. The vote passed. Malcolm nodded once. Then we moved forward. When the meeting ended, he lingered in the empty room. Outside, clouds gathered over the city. The silence after confrontation always felt heavier than the noise itself. He closed his eyes, hearing his grandmother's voice again. Sometimes, baby, you don't win by fighting louder. You win by standing so still they can't move past you. That evening, he found himself sitting on the couch at home, a cup of chamomile tea cooling beside him. The twins had just come back from school, if it could still be called that, after all the attention. Reporters had camped outside their gates. Classmates whispered. One teacher had even asked Maya if her father's actions were just for show. Maya threw her backpack down and groaned. They keep saying it's political. Dad, like you did it for attention. Malcolm looked up. And what do you say? She hesitated. I tell them you don't need attention. You already own the airline. He chuckled softly. That's one way to put it. Then his tone gentled. You tell them we didn't do this to be seen. We did it so no one else would have to feel invisible. Jalen sank into an armchair, scrolling through his tablet. The comments online are wild. Half the people call you a hero. The other half say you're making everything about race. Malcolm sighed. That's the price of holding a mirror. Not everyone likes what they see. The clock ticked quietly between them. Finally, Maya whispered, Are you scared? He didn't answer right away. His eyes went to the window again, the lights of the city blinking like restless stars. Of course, he said. But fear isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's the evidence that we're doing something that matters. He leaned forward. You know what's strange? The hardest part of leadership isn't speaking truth to power. It's speaking truth when power belongs to you. Jalen looked up, thoughtful. So what happens now? Now, Malcolm said, we rebuild. The next day brought an unexpected twist. A letter arrived at Ether HQ addressed to Malcolm, written in shaky cursive. It wasn't from a journalist or an employee, it was from Mr. Langston, the first-class passenger who'd taken their seats. Mr. Avery, I owe your children an apology. I didn't see it then, but I was part of the problem. My silence in that moment was as loud as Cassandra's words. I don't expect redemption, but I'd like to make a donation to your Passenger Dignity Council. Consider it a small repayment for the space I took. Malcolm folded the letter slowly, feeling something shift inside him. Guilt could turn into growth if someone dared to face it. Maybe Cassandra would too. By evening, his office light still glowed long after everyone had gone home. He reread the internal reports from HR, his eyes scanning every line like a surgeon tracing scars. Each complaint, each story, tiny wounds hidden under company polish. He realized how deep the problem went, how many passengers had quietly endured what his children had faced. That night, he wrote another memo. This one not for the board or PR. It was for the staff. To all Ether employees, I know the last few days have shaken our sky, but storms don't break what's built on truth. I ask you not to fear accountability. Fear the day we stop caring enough to ask for it. He signed it with his initials, a quiet promise that the real turbulence had only begun, and this time, he would not step aside. As he left the office, the cleaning crew greeted him with quiet respect. One of them, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, stopped him. "Sir, I saw the video. My daughter works at the airport. Thank you." Malcolm smiled, shook his hand, and walked out into the cool night air. Above him, the moon hung over Manhattan like a silver witness. The city moved on, unaware that somewhere, inside one man's steady resolve, a new kind of revolution was taking shape, not born from outrage, but from reflection. And for the first time since the incident, Malcolm felt a strange stillness inside, a moment of clarity before the storm of reform began. The morning sun spilled through the glass walls of Ether Air headquarters, casting gold across the marble floors, but the light did little to soften the tension that pulsed through every corridor. Everyone moved briskly, executives clutching tablets, assistants whispering updates, public relations teams glued to screens. The story hadn't died down. If anything, it was burning hotter. Inside his office, Malcolm Avery sat behind his desk, reading through the first reports from the newly formed Passenger Dignity Council. The files were unsettling, complaints that had never been reviewed, crew reports marked resolved but clearly weren't, anonymous letters describing humiliation, intimidation, fear. It wasn't a few bad actors. It was a culture problem. He rubbed his temples, then looked up as Dana Lee entered with a folder and an expression that mixed exhaustion and admiration. "Sir," she said quietly, "the press wants a statement about the council's progress. The board suggests we let the noise calm down first." Malcolm leaned back, eyes steady. "If we wait, people will think we're hiding something. Let them know I'll speak this evening." Dana hesitated. "There's more. Cassandra filed for a public hearing. She's claiming wrongful termination. Says you violated employee rights." Malcolm exhaled, his voice calm but low. "Let her speak. The truth will handle itself." As Dana left, Malcolm's phone buzzed. A message from Maya Dad. "You might want to see this." Attached was a video. He pressed play. Cassandra stood on a morning talk show, hair perfectly styled, tone carefully measured. "I've worked for Ether for 10 years. Never had an issue. But that day, I was following protocol. I didn't even know those kids were his. Suddenly, I'm branded a racist. My life's destroyed because of one misunderstanding." The host leaned in sympathetically. "So you feel you were unfairly punished?" "Yes," Cassandra said, eyes moist. "I was doing my job." The clip ended. Malcolm sat motionless. He could almost hear the chorus forming online defenders, deniers, cynics, all debating something they hadn't lived. That afternoon, he visited the training facility at LaGuardia, where Ether's flight crews gathered for orientation. Rows of young attendants sat upright, unsure whether to cheer or to hide. Malcolm stepped to the podium. "You've all seen what's happening," he began. "You've seen my face on the news, my children's names in headlines. Maybe some of you think this has nothing to do with you, but it has everything to do with you." The room grew still. He continued. "When someone steps onto a plane, they put their life in your hands, not just physically, but emotionally. You are the first and last faces they see. You decide whether they feel like a passenger or a problem." He paused, his tone deepening. "I'm not here to scold you. I'm here to ask something harder. What kind of sky do you want to be part of, the one that divides, or the one that carries in the front row?" A young attendant named Luis Vega raised his hand. "Sir, what if we don't know what to say? What if we're scared of saying the wrong thing?" Malcolm nodded slowly. "Then start by listening. The right words come after understanding." A quiet murmur rippled through the group, some nodding, some looking down, processing. He could see the fatigue on their faces, but also something else, possibility. After the session, Louis approached him privately. "Mr. Avery, I was on Flight 729, not in first class, but in the back. I saw everything. I wanted to step in, but I froze." Malcolm placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't freeze. You felt the weight of silence. It's heavy, but now you know how it feels. You'll never carry it again." That night, the live broadcast began. Malcolm sat before the camera in a simple navy suit, the Ether logo glowing faintly behind him. No makeup, no teleprompter, just him. "Good evening," he began softly. "You've heard many voices over the last few days, some angry, some afraid, some simply tired. Tonight, I want to speak not as a CEO, but as a father." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "My children boarded Flight 729 with excitement. They were proud to fly on the airline their father built. But within minutes, they were told their seats didn't belong to them, not because of their names, but because of their faces." He leaned forward slightly, eyes steady on the lens. "Some say it was a misunderstanding. But when the same kind of misunderstanding happens again and again to the same kind of people, it's not confusion, it's conditioning." A subtle tremor passed through his voice, not of weakness, but of truth. "We can't pretend the sky is fair if the ground isn't. So we're not waiting for a new storm to act. Starting now, Ether Air is launching mandatory empathy and equity training across every division, from the front line to the boardroom." He outlined the reforms with clarity: the Passenger Dignity Council's oversight, transparent complaint reviews, independent investigators, and a scholarship fund for aspiring pilots from underrepresented communities. Then he said something no one expected. "And for those who were part of the incident, including Cassandra Reed, I invite you to participate. Accountability isn't exile, it's education." Viewers across the country froze. Even Dana, watching from the control booth, turned to the technicians in disbelief. It wasn't vengeance Malcolm sought, it was transformation. When the broadcast ended, social media erupted. Hashtags like "the same sky" and "either promise" trended within hours. Commentators called it the most composed act of leadership they'd seen in years. Others mocked it as corporate theater. But for most ordinary viewers, something shifted. The calm sincerity in Malcolm's eyes cut through cynicism. Late that night, Malcolm sat alone again, watching the skyline shimmer against the Hudson. His phone buzzed once more, an unknown number. A text appeared. "You don't know me. I was a flight attendant years ago. I left after being told to smile differently for certain passengers. I watched your speech tonight. For the first time, I feel seen. Thank you. He smiled faintly. Not victory, just a flicker of purpose renewed. But peace never lasts long when change begins. Early next morning, Dana rushed into his office. "Sir, you need to see this." She placed a folder on his desk. Inside were leaked internal emails, lines of text highlighted in red. "We can't let this council dig too deep. There are settlements, incidents buried years ago. If Avery insists on transparency, we're finished. Names, dates, signatures, even Olson's initials." Malcolm's jaw tightened. The battle wasn't just against ignorance. It was against those profiting from keeping it hidden. He looked out the window again. The city gleamed cold and brilliant. "Then we bring everything into the light," he said quietly. Dana swallowed hard. "That could destroy careers, reputations." "Good," Malcolm replied. "It means we're finally close to the truth." The story wasn't over. It was only taking flight. The next morning, Ether's headquarters didn't wake up. It braced itself. The leak had spread like wildfire. Screens across the building flashed with words that no PR filter could bury now. Internal cover-up allegations, Ether executives suppressed racial bias complaints. Malcolm arrived before sunrise. The lobby, usually calm and polished, buzzed with fear. Conversations died when he passed. Employees glanced up, half respecting, half terrified. He walked straight to his office without a word. Dana was already there, pale but composed, clutching a tablet. "They know," she said simply. "I expected they would." Malcolm replied, "Who leaked it?" Dana hesitated. "We're not sure. I traced it to an internal account, but it was wiped remotely. Whoever did this knew our system inside out." He took the tablet, scrolling through the leaked messages again. Olson's name glared from the screen, tied to phrases like settlement avoidance, controlled narrative, and passenger incident suppression. The words weren't just damaging, they were damning. They were burying these cases for years, Dana said, voice shaking. Dozens of them. Quiet payoffs. Dismissals labeled resolved. It's not just ethics. Malcolm, it's criminal. Malcolm set the tablet down slowly. Then it's time for the truth to fly. Later that morning, the board gathered in emergency session. Olson entered last, his usual confidence frayed around the edges. His suit was perfect, but his eyes betrayed sleeplessness. "Malcolm," he began sharply, "we need to contain this. If this leak continues, we'll lose investor confidence within 48 hours. Malcolm folded his hands calmly. "We already lost something more important, your integrity. This isn't the time for speeches," Olson snapped. "We're at risk of collapse." "The risk began the day we started covering the truth," Malcolm countered. The room rippled with tension. Dana slid a printed copy of the leaked emails onto the table. "These messages are authentic. Legal already confirmed metadata traces. If we deny this, we'll only dig deeper into the hole." Olson's tone hardened. "You're assuming this leak wasn't staged by your counsel? Convenient timing for your little crusade." Malcolm looked him dead in the eye. "I didn't leak it, Chairman, but whoever did saved us from dying in silence. The CFO. Harold Trent interjected nervously. "What's the plan then?" "Go public, apologize, fire. Olson. That'll destroy morale." Malcolm stood. "No, Harold. What destroys morale is hypocrisy." He walked to the window, where the skyline glowed faintly beneath a layer of gray clouds. "We'll hold a press conference this afternoon. We'll admit the leak. We'll acknowledge the wrongs. And we'll begin our audit today, live-streamed." Gas filled the room. Live, Dana repeated softly, astonished. Yes, Malcolm said. No more back rooms. If we want trust, we earn it in daylight. Olson slammed his hand on the table. You're out of your mind. Maybe, Malcolm replied quietly. But sometimes madness is just courage misunderstood. That afternoon, the world watched. Cameras packed the lobby. Journalists jostled for space. Flashes igniting like lightning strikes. Malcolm walked to the podium without a written statement. His calmness wasn't arrogance, it was armor. Good afternoon, he began. By now, you've all seen the internal documents circulating online. They are real. They reveal failures within Ether Air's leadership, including decisions that prioritized image over integrity. For that, I take responsibility. The crowd murmured. Reporters leaned in. I will not defend the indefensible. Instead, we are opening every record, every settlement, every case of discrimination that was silenced. Our newly formed Passenger Dignity Council will conduct a full public audit. Starting tonight, a journalist shouted. Mr. Avery, are you saying the board knew Malcolm paused? His answer was deliberate. Some did, some stayed silent. Both are unacceptable. Olson, watching from the back, turned pale. The press exploded with questions, but Malcolm raised a hand. Before you ask if Ether will survive this, I'll tell you something simple. Survival without honor isn't success, it's stagnation. When he finished, the room erupted. Some clapped, others shouted, but the message had landed draw, fearless and impossible to ignore. That evening, Malcolm returned home, drained but alert. His twins were waiting. Maya ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Dad, everyone at school was talking about you again. They said you're the bravest man alive. He smiled faintly. Bravery isn't about not being scared, sweetheart. It's about doing what's right, even when you are. Jalen came closer, his expression serious. Are you going to get fired? Malcolm chuckled softly. If telling the truth gets me fired, then maybe that's a promotion in disguise. They laughed gently, a brief reprieve in the storm. Later that night, Malcolm received a call from an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A quiet voice came through. Mr. Avery, this is Cassandra Reed. He froze for a second. Her tone wasn't defensive, it was trembling. I saw your speech, she continued. And the leak? I didn't know about any of that. I thought I was just following orders that day. But now, I see how wrong I was. Malcolm remained silent, listening. I've been getting message shade, threats. I can't even walk outside. But I wanted to say, I'm sorry. Not because of what's happening to me. Because of what I did to your kids. To you. Her voice cracked. I thought professionalism meant detachment. I didn't realize it meant dehumanization. Malcolm's tone softened. Thank you for saying that. Cassandra, the hardest part of change isn't realizing others are wrong, it's realizing we were too. I want to help, she whispered. If the council will let me, I'll testify. Tell them what really happens in the cabins, the unspoken rules. He nodded slowly. You'll have that chance. After the call. Malcolm sat alone in the quiet glow of his study. Outside, rain began to fall steady, cleansing rhythm against the windows. He thought of every name in those buried emails, every story silenced for convenience. His grandmother's words came back again, clearer this time. Sometimes the truth don't set you free, it sets everything else on fire first. And she had been right. The next day, Ether's headquarters turned into a command center. Lawyers, investigators, journalists, all converging. The first live audit session began at noon. Dana led the proceedings beside Malcolm, her voice firm but calm. On the screen, case after case appeared, names redacted, details verified, accountability restored. At one point, a letter was read aloud complaint from a young mother of color whose infant was denied assistance during a flight 3 years ago. She had been told her concerns weren't urgent. She never received a response. As the room fell silent, Malcolm's expression hardened with quiet pain. "This is why we can't stop," he said softly. "Because the sky doesn't care what color you are, but people still do." By evening, Ether's stock had fallen 11%. Commentators predicted bankruptcy, but ordinary people, passengers, employees, families, filled social media with one simple phrase: "He didn't run." That night, Dana sent him a message. "We may lose the company, Malcolm, but we're winning back something bigger." He replied with 3 words: "Then it's worth it." As dawn crept over the city again, the skyline shimmered silver and blue. The storm had not passed, but somewhere inside its roar, truth was beginning to breathe. The morning after the live audit, New York felt quieter, too quiet. It wasn't peace. It was the breath before the verdict. News anchors replayed Malcolm Avery's speech every hour. Some praised his courage. Others accused him of orchestrating chaos to save face. But within the glass towers of ether air, something irreversible had shifted. In the boardroom, Chairman Olson sat stiffly, his hands clenched around a coffee cup. Across from him, Malcolm reviewed the latest reports. The council's first round of findings was damning a decade of buried complaints, coded bias in upgrade algorithms, and internal notes labeling certain passengers as risk-tier CA euphemism that, in plain language, meant black or brown and assertive. Olson cleared his throat. "This is going too far. Malcolm, you're dismantling the company from the inside." Malcolm didn't look up. "I'm dismantling what broke it." Olson's jaw tightened. "You're turning ether into a spectacle. Do you realize what's at stake? Investors are panicking. We're bleeding millions by the hour." "Then let it bleed," Malcolm said quietly. "At least now is honest blood." The older man slammed the table. "You're playing martyr. You think this makes you noble? It makes you reckless." Malcolm finally met his gaze, calm but fierce. Reckless is pretending the sky is safe while it's filled with silent prejudice. Reckless is calling injustice a PR problem. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Malcolm stood, gathering the files. "We have a shareholders' assembly in 3 hours. You can either stand beside me or behind history." When the door closed, Olson exhaled, shoulders sagging. He knew the tide had turned, but he wasn't ready to be washed away. That afternoon, the Ether shareholder assembly began. Hundreds filled the virtual and physical halls. Investors, employees, passengers. Cameras streamed the event live. The world watched as Malcolm stepped to the stage, not as a man defending himself, but as someone determined to redefine what leadership meant. He began softly. "You've seen the headlines. You've read the leaks. But behind every report is a human story, a face we ignored, a voice we silenced." A slide flashed behind him, names of passengers whose complaints were buried, anonymous, yet painfully real. One of them was a veteran. He continued. Denied boarding because of irregular documentation. Another, a mother traveling with her autistic son, told she was being disruptive. Another, a musician escorted off a plane after being mistaken for a security threat because he wore a hoodie. He paused, scanning the crowd. And then there were my children. A murmur rippled through the room. He didn't flinch. When my twins were told they didn't belong in the seats they paid for, it wasn't just an insult, it was a revelation. Because it proved what many of us already knew, that dignity still comes with conditions. He took a breath. Today, I'm asking you not for forgiveness, but for participation. We can't rebuild trust from the top down. We rebuilt it side by side. He turned toward the shareholders' table. Starting immediately, Ether's bylaws will be amended. The Passenger Dignity Council will have permanent voting rights on board policy. Every year, their audit will be published publicly. No more hidden settlements. No more quiet firings. No more shame and silence. The audience erupted, some applauding, some protesting. Olson stood abruptly. You can't unilaterally change bylaws. This is still a business, not a social experiment. Malcolm faced him squarely. If a business can't exist without harming people, then it deserves to fail. Gaffs. Cameras clicked like thunder. For a moment, Olson looked ready to strike back, but then his composure cracked. The live stream caught the flicker of fear in his eyes. He knew it was over. That night, after the assembly, Malcolm returned home. He found Maya and Jalen sitting by the piano, the television muted. Maya was writing something in her notebook. What's that? He asked. She smiled shyly. An essay for school. They want us to write about someone we look up to. Jalen grinned. She's writing about you? Malcolm chuckled. That might not be a very popular choice these days. She shook her head. They don't have to like it. They just have to listen. He stood there for a long time, watching his children. They'd endured more than any teenager should: mockery, isolation, exposure, but they'd also become unshakably aware. And that awareness that empathy was the real inheritance he wanted to leave them. Later that evening, as rain drummed softly on the windows, Dana called. Her voice was urgent. Malcolm, we just got confirmation. The Justice Department wants to open a formal investigation into Ether's past operations. They'll subpoena internal records within 48 hours. He didn't sound surprised. Good. We'll cooperate fully. There's more, she added hesitantly. Olson resigned an hour ago. But before he left, he filed a legal injunction trying to freeze your reforms until the investigation concludes. Malcolm's eyes darkened. So he's still fighting shadows. Should I prepare a counter motion? No, he said, his tone steady. Let the investigation speak first. Truth doesn't need to be rushed. After hanging up, he poured himself a cup of coffee and walked out onto the balcony. The city shimmered below lights, reflecting off wet asphalt, like constellations fallen to earth. He thought of Cassandra's trembling voice, of Luis's confession, of Dana's steadfastness, of the nameless passengers whose stories had finally surfaced. Then in the distance, thunder rolled. The next morning, the federal team arrived at Ether HQ. Agents moved through the building with quiet precision. Reporters lined the sidewalks, cameras poised. Employees whispered as they watched boxes of files being carried out. Malcolm greeted the lead investigator, Agent Samuel Wright, a tall man with calm authority. Mr. Avery, Wright said, extending a hand. We appreciate your cooperation. Malcolm shook it firmly. Just tell the truth. That's all I ask. As the hours passed, the walls of secrecy that had guarded Ether for years began to crumble. Contracts surfaced, showing how executives had manipulated reports to protect bonuses. One file revealed a chilling detail, a secret database categorizing passengers by behavioral likelihood data that effectively profiled customers of color as potential risks. When the news broke that night, social media exploded. Ether's reputation was collapsing, but Malcolm's integrity was ascending. People began posting under a new tag, "Nor grounded for truth." Even late-night hosts, who once mocked the scandal, now spoke with respect. One of them said, "In an era of deflection, Malcolm Avery did something radical. He faced the mirror and didn't look away." At home, Maya watched the segment, tears welling in her eyes. "Dad," she whispered, "they finally see." Malcolm smiled faintly. "I didn't need them to see me. I needed them to see us." That night, he couldn't sleep. The city hummed outside his window, and he felt the weight of both loss and liberation. He opened his notebook, the same one his grandmother once used for church notes, and wrote, "Justice isn't loud, it's steady." He closed the book, exhaled, and whispered into the stillness, "Let it be steady." Then, for the first time in weeks, he felt the faint beginning of peace, not the peace of victory, but of truth finally breathing in open air. The storm arrived before dawn. Thunder cracked above Manhattan like the city itself was protesting. The rain hit the glass walls of Ether's headquarters in angry waves, and for a moment, it felt like the whole world was watching to see if Malcolm Avery would drown or rise. By 6, the media vans were already lined up outside. Headlines scrolled endlessly. "Ether under federal scrutiny, faces reckoning." The Justice Department's investigation had gone public overnight, and although Malcolm had expected it, he hadn't expected the sheer noise that followed. When he entered the building, he found Dana waiting, coffee in one hand, dark circles under her eyes. "They're calling this the biggest corporate bias investigation in aviation history," she said, almost whispering. "Olson's lawyers are blaming everything on you, saying, 'This was your way of deflecting guilt.'" Malcolm adjusted his tie, his tone steady. "People point fingers when they're afraid to look in the mirror." Donna exhaled. "It's getting ugly. We've lost another round of investors. The stock's down 20%. Let it fall," he said quietly. "We'll build it again. Stronger." The elevator doors opened to the 48th floor, revealing chaos calls, press statements, security escorts. But in the middle of it all, something small caught his attention. Luis Vega, the young flight attendant from LaGuardia, stood by the reception desk, holding a folder against his chest. Luis, Malcolm asked, surprised. The young man hesitated. "Sir, I found something. During training, I was helping archive old reports. I think you need to see this." Malcolm motioned for him to follow. Inside his office, Luis placed a stack of documents on the desk. These are older than the others, about 12 years old. They're reports from a company called Skycom Systems. Malcolm's brow furrowed. "That's before Ether merged. Why are they relevant?" "Because," Luis said carefully, "Skycom designed the original passenger verification system, the one still in use on international flights." He pointed to a paragraph highlighted in red. "They programmed bias codes into the algorithm, race-coded behavior markers. They called it predictive risk analysis." Malcolm's stomach dropped. "They hardwired discrimination into the software." Luis nodded, and no one removed it after the merger. For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. Then Malcolm said, almost to himself, "They built the system to profile people, like me and my children." Dana's voice was tight. "If this is true, it's not just a scandal. It's a civil rights violation." Malcolm turned to Luis. "You did the right thing bringing this here, but now it's going to get dangerous." "I can handle it," Luis said, his voice steady. "After that flight, I stopped being afraid. By noon, Malcolm had gathered the council, Dana, and Agent Samuel Wright in the boardroom. The air was thick with tension. The agent studied the documents, frowning deeply. "This isn't just corporate negligence," Wright said. "This is systemic." The software discriminated automatically. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of passengers could have been flagged for additional screening based on race alone. Dana looked pale. "It means Ether inherited the system's bias and never corrected it." Wright closed the folder. "If this gets out, the entire aviation industry will have to overhaul its systems." "You realize what you're setting off." Malcolm met his gaze without flinching. "Justice rarely comes without turbulence." The agent nodded slowly. "We'll coordinate with federal tech specialists, but I'll warn you once this surfaces, you'll have both the government and the industry gunning for you." "I'm not aiming to win," Malcolm said. "I'm aiming to fix what should have never been broken." That evening, while the city flickered with stormlight, Malcolm sat in his office alone. Outside, the clouds rolled low and violent. His reflection stared back at him from the window, a man caught between destruction and rebirth. He thought of his grandmother again, her voice echoing in memory. "Baby, storms ain't punishment. They're permission to start over." Then his phone buzzed. A message from Cassandra. "I've decided to testify tomorrow. I'll tell them what the manual really said. How we were told to watch certain profiles. I owe it to your kids and to myself." Malcolm smiled faintly, a warmth cutting through the cold. Redemption wasn't a headline. It was a whisper in the rain. The next morning, Ether's main auditorium filled to capacity. Reporters, investigators, employees all there for the council's emergency hearing. Cameras streamed live as Cassandra took the stand. She looked nervous, but resolute. "During my 10 years at Ether," she began, "we were told certain things without being told outright. We were told to be extra cautious with unpredictable passengers, to smile less, to keep distance. They didn't have to say it. It was understood who they meant." She swallowed hard. "I believed it was professionalism, but it was prejudice dressed as policy." The audience was silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Cassandra continued, her voice trembling. "When I saw those kids that day, I thought I was enforcing the rules, but now I know I was enforcing a lie." Malcolm watched from the front row. For the first time, he saw not the woman who hurt his children, but the person trying to unlearn what the world had taught her. After the hearing, reporters swarmed Cassandra, but she refused interviews. Instead, she walked quietly over to Malcolm. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said softly. "I just hope my truth helps." "It already has," he replied. By evening, the story broke nationwide. Networks called it the testimony that changed aviation. Public outrage turned to collective reflection. Activists praised Ether's transparency. Competitors scrambled to review their systems. That night, as Malcolm stood on his balcony again, lightning stitched the sky above the city. He could feel the shift small, fragile, but real. The storm wasn't destroying Ether. It was cleansing it. Dana joined him outside, holding 2 cups of coffee. "The president just mentioned your investigation in his press briefing," she said with a faint smile. "He called it a model for corporate accountability." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Never thought I'd make policy through scandal." "Sometimes," Dana said, looking out at the skyline. "The only way to clean the air is to stir it first." He nodded slowly, then turned back toward the city. "We're not done yet. This storm still has one more wave." And deep down, he knew she was right. The truth was out, But the reckoning wasn't over. The system might bend, but it hadn't yet broken. Still, for the first time in months, Malcolm allowed himself one quiet, exhale breath that tasted like hope. The first light of morning spilled gently through the high windows of Malcolm Avery's office, glinting off the polished mahogany table that had witnessed weeks of battles, truths, and awakenings. Outside, the storm had passed. The clouds drifted apart like curtains drawing back for a new act. For the first time in a long while, the city below didn't look hostile, it looked expectant. Malcolm stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the horizon glow. The news channels were still looping footage from Cassandra's testimony the day before. Her trembling voice, her honesty, it had struck a nerve. People were calling it the day silence cracked. He glanced at his phone. Hundreds of new messages, interviews, meeting requests, but one notification caught his eye, a message from Luis Vega. Mr. Avery, the crews are asking if they can help rewrite the training manual. They said they want to make sure what happened never happens again. Malcolm smiled, the kind of smile that came not from victory, but from recognition. The movement had begun from the top down, but from the ground up. When he arrived at headquarters, the atmosphere was different. People nodded to him, not out of fear, but out of respect. There was still tension, but it had changed color. It wasn't the dread of collapse anymore, it was the weight of responsibility. Dana was waiting at his door, holding a tablet. The investigation team wrapped their report at 3 a.m., she said. They're recommending major penalties, but they're also acknowledging your cooperation. They called your reforms unprecedented. Malcolm nodded. An Olson. He's fled the city, probably trying to negotiate immunity. Malcolm sighed softly. Let him run. The truth travels faster than fear. She followed him inside. The council wants to release the new training and ethics program tonight. They're calling it the Sky Protocol. The Sky Protocol, he repeated, tasting the phrase. That has a good sound to it. Dana smiled faintly. It's Luis's idea. He chuckled. Then it's perfect. By mid-afternoon, the auditorium was filled again, executives, crew, journalists, and a few guests who'd become unlikely allies Cassandra. Standing quietly in the back, Luis, his uniform crisp, Agent Wright, arms crossed but with a hint of approval in his eyes. Even Maya and Jalen sat in the front row, their expressions proud and steady. When Malcolm stepped up to the podium, a hush fell. 2 months ago, he began. Our story became the world's lesson. We didn't ask for it, but we didn't run from it either. The truth forced us to face ourselves, and now it's time to rebuild differently. He turned to the screen behind him, where the words "The Sky Protocol" glowed in soft blue. This isn't a policy, it's a promise, he said. From now on, every passenger complaint will be reviewed by a panel that includes not just executives, but crew members and passengers themselves. Every incident will be recorded, reviewed, and resolved publicly. Bias training won't be a box. We check it'll be part of who we are. He clicked to the next slide photos of real people attendants, mechanics, gate agents, and passengers who had shared their stories. Because the sky, Malcolm continued, doesn't belong to a few. It belongs to everyone who dares to look up. A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. Dana smiled subtly. Luis's eyes glistened. Then Malcolm did something unexpected. He stepped away from the microphone and gestured toward the audience. Luis Vega, he said, would you come up here for a moment? The young man froze, startled. But under the encouraging nods of his colleagues, he walked up, nervous but proud. Luis was the one who found the old files that revealed how our system worked against the very people it should have protected. Malcolm said, "He didn't have to speak up, but he did. That's courage. And from today, I'm appointing him as the first representative of the passenger equity team, reporting directly to the CEO." The room erupted in applause. Luis looked overwhelmed. Sir? Oh, don't know what to say. Malcolm smiled. Just keep saying the truth. As the noise subsided, Dana leaned close and whispered, "You just made the front page again. Let's hope for the right reasons this time," Malcolm murmured. Later that evening, as the cameras left and the hall emptied, Malcolm walked outside with Maya and Jalen. The air smelled of rain and renewal. The setting sun spilled gold across the wet pavement. Maya nudged him gently. "You know, Dad, they're calling you the man who rewrote the sky." He chuckled softly. "I just reminded people what it was supposed to mean." Jalen glanced up. "So what happens now?" Now Malcolm looked out over the skyline. "Now we make sure this doesn't stop with us." Back inside, he returned to his office to find an envelope waiting on his desk. No name, just a single line on the front, for when it gets quiet. He opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note. "Mr. Avery, I was one of the passengers flagged by that system years ago. They told me my behavior was suspicious because I was nervous boarding the plane. I'm a war veteran. I wasn't nervous. I was remembering. Thank you for giving us our names back. A passenger who finally feels seen." Malcolm's eyes stung. He set the letter down gently and looked out at the city lights. So many lives touched by one chain of choices. A soft knock came at the door. It was Dana again. "The press wants a final statement for the evening broadcast. Something to close this chapter." He thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Tell them this isn't the end. Tell them the sky's just getting rewritten, one name, one story at a time." As she left, he lingered by the window, the hum of the city rising beneath him like a quiet heartbeat. His phone buzzed once more, a message from Cassandra. "The council approved me as a diversity consultant. Thank you for not giving up on me." He typed back, "Growth begins the moment we stop running from who we were." Hours later, when the city finally went still, Malcolm stepped out onto the balcony. The night was clear, a few stars stubbornly visible against the city glow. He felt the breeze lift against his face, gentle and real. In that moment, he thought about all the storms he'd endured, the humiliation of his children, the corporate war, the loneliness of leading against the tide, and he realized something profound. Justice wasn't about victory. It was about creation. It was about building something honest out of brokenness. Behind him, the lights in the office dimmed. Ahead of him, the horizon glowed faintly where dawn would soon return. He closed his eyes and whispered softly, almost as a prayer, "Let the next sky be fair." And with that, Malcolm Avery finally exhaled, not as a CEO, not as a symbol, but simply as a father who had done what he promised. The world had changed, and for once, it felt like it might stay that way. A year had passed since the day Malcolm Avery grounded the plane that changed everything. To most of the world, the story had become legend, one of those moments people referenced when speaking about justice, dignity, and quiet power. But for Malcolm, it wasn't about legend. It was about legacy. And legacy, he had learned, wasn't written in headlines. It was built in the unseen moments afterward. The morning sun poured softly into his kitchen in upstate New York. The air smelled of coffee and maple toast. Maya and Jalen sat at the counter, laughing about something on Maya's tabletop clip from a talk show where passengers praised the Sky Protocol. "Dad," Maya said, turning the screen toward him, "they're saying this program cut discrimination reports by 80% across all partner airlines." Malcolm smiled faintly, stirring his coffee. "That's a good start, but numbers are only proof that people are trying. What matters is whether they've learned to see each other." Jalen, now taller and more confident, leaned back in his chair. "Luis texted me yesterday. Said they're launching a youth internship program under your name, the Avery Equity Fellowship." "Luis did that," Malcolm chuckled. "He's quicker than the board. I'll give him that." The doorbell rang, breaking the quiet. Dana Lee stepped in, her usual calm wrapped in a winter coat. She looked more rested now, softer somehow. "Morning, Malcolm," she said. "You look like a man who finally sleeps." "I'm trying," he replied. "Coffee." She accepted a cup and sat. "I came with an update. The Department of Transportation just made the Sky Protocol a national model. Every major airline is adopting it." "Ah," Malcolm's expression softened. "Then it's not ours anymore," he said quietly. "It belongs to everyone." Dana nodded. "Exactly what you wanted." He looked out the window, where sunlight glimmered off the frozen trees. "I wanted my kids to fly without fear," he said. "The rest is grace." That afternoon, he drove into the city for a commemorative event at Ether Air's headquarters. The auditorium was different now. More open, warmer, filled with a kind of light that didn't come from chandeliers, but from people. Crew members wore pins shaped like tiny silver wings, with a blue circle at the center, the Sky Protocol emblem. Luis greeted him near the stage. "Sir, sorry. Malcolm, the memorial wall's ready. We wanted you to see it first." He led him to a curved glass installation lined with etched names. But these weren't of executives or leaders. They were the names of passengers who had filed discrimination complaints, the names of crew members who had spoken up, and even a few who had been wrongfully accused, but later cleared. At the top, the inscription read, "Every name deserves air." Malcolm's throat tightened. "Who came up with that line?" Luis smiled. "You did. Last year. You just didn't know we were listening." The ceremony began. Cassandra Reed took the podium first, her voice clear and humble. "We can't change what we did," she said, "but we can make sure that silence never protects us again. The man I once failed to respect, he taught me that accountability isn't punishment. It's the start of redemption." Applause rippled through the hall. Malcolm felt an ache of pride, not for himself, but for the fact that people could change. Afterward, he was approached by a gray-haired woman with kind eyes. "Mr. Avery," she said softly. "I was on that flight the day you grounded it. I never thanked you. You made me realize how much I'd been blind to." He shook her hand gently. "Thank you for seeing now," he replied. As the crowd dispersed, Malcolm wandered to the observation deck above the city. Below him, planes took off, one after another rising into the winter sky. Each one carried not just passengers, but a promise. Maya joined him quietly, slipping her hand into his. "Dad, when you grounded that plane, did you know it would turn out like this?" He laughed softly. "No, I just knew something had to stop before it broke someone else." She looked up at him. "So what now? What's next?" He thought for a long moment before answering. "Now, we take this beyond the sky, maybe into hospitals, schools, corporations, anywhere people forget that respect is oxygen." Maya smiled. "You sound like a poet." He chuckled. "No, just a man learning to breathe again." Later that night, in the quiet of his study, Malcolm opened an old folder: news articles, letters, testimonies. At the very top was a photo of the twins sitting in first class, their hands clasped, their eyes proud. That single image had traveled the world. He turned it over. On the back, in Maya's handwriting, were the words, "We didn't just fly. We changed the air." A gentle knock came at the door. Dana entered again, holding a sealed envelope. "One last thing," she said, "from the White House." Malcolm opened it slowly. It was an official commendation, recognizing him and the Ether team for transformative contributions to national civil aviation ethics and human dignity. At the bottom was a handwritten note. "You didn't just fix a company. You reminded a country what decency looks like." He stared at it in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything settling quietly on his chest. "This belongs to all of them," he said finally. "Every passenger who spoke up, every worker who risked their job to tell the truth." Dana smiled. "And to one man who refused to look away." The next morning, he woke early and drove out to the airfield. The hangars stood gleaming in the pale dawn. A new aircraft was parked by the runway, its fuselage painted with a single phrase in silver and blue: "Fly equal." A maintenance worker saw him and waved. "You like the new look," he called out. Malcolm smiled, walking closer. "I love it." "Who came up with it?" "Luis and his team." They said it was time the planes spoke for themselves. As the engines roared to life, Malcolm stepped back, his heart swelling. The sound wasn't noise anymore. It was a promise taking flight. He stayed until the plane disappeared into the clouds. Then he whispered softly, "That's how it should have always been." In the weeks that followed, the story spread further than anyone expected. Universities taught it in ethics classes. Pilots quoted it in commencement speeches. Even other industries adopted their own versions of the Sky Protocol. But the part that mattered most to Malcolm came one night at dinner when Jalen, now preparing for college, looked up from his plate and said, "Dad, I think I want to study aviation law." Malcolm looked at him, surprised. "Aviation law." Why? Jalen smiled. "Because I want to make sure no one ever has to call their dad just to be treated fairly." For a moment, Malcolm couldn't speak. Then he simply reached over, squeezed his son's hand, and whispered, "Then you'll be flying higher than any of us ever did." Outside, the night was clear, and somewhere above the city, a plane cut silently across the starset's lights, glimmering like a moving constellation. And for the first time, Malcolm felt peace not as the absence of conflict, but as the quiet certainty that something good would last. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it breathes steady, human, and endless. And that night, under a sky reborn, the world breathed easier. The story of Malcolm Avery isn't just about power or revenge. It's about dignity, accountability, and the courage to respond to pain with purpose. When his children faced discrimination, he didn't shout or destroy. He rebuilt. He showed that true leadership is not measured by control, but by compassion, the willingness to turn humiliation into reform. In life, we often face moments where silence feels safer, but silence never changes what's wrong. Justice doesn't always need to roar. Sometimes it whispers through steady actions and quiet strength. Malcolm's decision reminds us that every one of us has influence, at home, at work, in our communities. The question is, will we use it to protect our pride or to elevate others? His story teaches that forgiveness isn't weakness, and accountability isn't cruelty. It's how humanity evolves. And in the end, real change begins the moment we decide to make the world fairer. even when it's inconvenient. Thank you for watching and for sharing this moment with us. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue creating stories that honor truth, dignity, and hope. Let's keep spreading compassion, one story at a time.